Land grab. You remember land grab? We're talking about nut farms? Eminent domain. What was the story with land grab?
Government can steal the land or something.
Government can steal the land.
Took some guys.
This is on tape, Bill Goon. Be careful what you say.
They took some guys from the farm because they wanted to build like some entertainment complex or something.
Okay, now I did use the example of a peanut farm, but I don't know that they took somebody's peanut farm. What was it that they took? Because we had a big debate about this.
Lower class neighborhood.
Lower class. It was a blighted or a poor neighborhood. And basically the state's argument, or pardon me, the community's argument, what was the community's argument on this? Why did they say that they should be allowed to force people that had not broken any laws, but really their only problem was that they were poor? Why? What's that?
It's better for the state.
Why?
More business.
Why?
Jobs.
It would create jobs. It would generate higher property tax revenue and sales tax revenue and income tax revenues, things like this. And then in fact, what could the community do with these additional monies?
Build schools, hospitals.
Schools, hospitals, police, fire department, roads. What would happen to the people that live there?
They will replace to another place.
They would get compensation, what a reasonable person would pay for their land, but would they be able to buy anything on the new property development? No, they wouldn't. And as I recall, a lot of people in both classes said, I do the deal. I basically force the poor people to sell. I build the shopping malls and the restaurants and the condominiums and things like this, and then they can work in my new businesses. A number of people said life, liberty, and property, and what is, or pardon me, pursuit of happiness. And what is pursuit of happiness?
Sex.
We're basically taking away their property. Yeah, sex was one of them too. Yeah, I'll come back to that. Property was basically what you're taking from them, and this seems like something that was wrong. Was it legal?
Yeah.
It was legal, and the Supreme Court said yes, it was perfectly legal to do this. Yes?
Is this only for state government? Like, can the federal government do?
If you remember, I had given you the article about the Supreme Court justice who was getting his land taken,
Yes.
and Bush at that time said the federal government's not going to get involved in this, anymore, kind of a thing.
Okay.
So yeah, the feds really, that kind of depends on who the president is, but they've been doing less and less. Go ahead.
They were saying that, they were saying something about eminent domain was legal at that time.
Yeah, eminent domain is illegal. Eminent domain, though, is the idea that you take it for a public purpose. So if you build a hospital and you force somebody to sell land, everybody would use the hospital. Or if you force somebody to sell their land in order to build a road, everybody would build a road. But if you remember, with this one, they were building malls and restaurants and condominiums where only certain people would really be able to afford to live or eat or shop. And that's not the same as a public purpose, but the Supreme Court said it was legal to do this. It was legal to do.
Wow.
Any other article questions? ERA is pretty straightforward. We talked about the drug law. Not the president's call. We hit on this. Who has the ability to declare war?
Congress.
Why?
So much time.
Why?
War powers.
Why?
Because they don't want constitution control.
Why would the president not be allowed to declare war? According to the article, why was it better for Congress?
It's not one person.
Congress was
Because it's not one person. If you have more people in the actual debate, then in theory you're going to get a better decision. The president with one person might not think as clearly, but once war is declared, who is in charge? Because it's easier for one person to be in charge of the mission, but not necessarily in charge of the decision. Yes?
But president have like 90 days of.
War Powers Resolution says the president has 90 days to do what?
To operate a mission in order to.
President can station troops anywhere in the world for any reason at all for 90 days, and on day 91,
Congress, president needs to justify it always.
for the first 90 days, all the president has to do is inform Congress of what's going on in the leadership. On day 91, the president has to justify it, and if in fact the Congress does not accept the justification, they can bring the troops home. What power were they going to use to bring them home? They were going to cut funding, which would mean it was the tax and spend power, but they might look really bad by abandoning the troops if they were to have done this. What do you got from chapter 3? Ian, I think you had a commerce power question, yes?
The idea of tax and spend and commerce power.
Yes.
Their commerce power is basically like interstate commerce.
There's two pieces that need to be met in order for the commerce power to kick in. What are the two pieces?
Those are exchange of goods and services.
Yes.
And then must cross state lines.
And it must cross state lines. So as long as something is an exchange of goods or services, and if you remember, you could talk about soap, you could talk about tomatoes, you could talk about prostitution. All of these would be examples of goods and services. If you're in Tuesday, Thursday, we're going to do commerce tomorrow. So this might be new, so don't worry yet. We'll get to it tomorrow. I promise that.
And I know you mentioned about the Mann Act.
Yes.
About that.
What was the Mann Act?
A law that
If a man crosses state lines with a woman, he is subject to prostitution for immoral issues.
Wait. If a man
crosses state lines
yes.
with a woman, he is subject to prostitution for immoral issues.
He's subject to prosecution.
Prosecution.
Yes, okay, I got the words right, you've just jumbled them up. The Mann Act basically says that if a man crosses state lines with a woman with immoral purposes in mind, he would be subject to federal prosecution. What crime were they trying to regulate?
Human trafficking.
They were trying to deal with the white slave trade or human trafficking, prostitution. What, though, would this open you up to prosecution for? Prostitute.
Yeah.
Have you ever crossed state lines with a young gentleman
Yeah.
and spent the night?
Yeah.
Yeah? And you were married?
No.
Is that immoral?
Yeah.
If she's over 18, right? She's a
No, it doesn't matter. This is the thing on this. Remember when we were talking about this? The trick with this, I'm sorry, you said, okay, we're just kind of playing. Okay, bottom line on this. If a man crosses state lines with a woman with immoral purposes in mind, and as I recall, we were talking about Natalie in this class, and Natalie had said that, yes, she did cross state lines. Yes, they did stay. Yes, they did share the room. Yes, they did buy things along the way. If you got the wrong judge, the wrong police, the wrong district attorney, you could conceivably be brought up on charges of the Mann Act. Because evidently she had done some immoral things. Was Natalie a prostitute? No. Was her boyfriend a pimp? No. Were they married? No. Some people would say that would be immoral, and the commerce power would allow that to be regulated.
Are there still DAs that would do that?
In fact, do you remember the example that I gave you in class of somebody who would have been subject to a Mann Act prosecution? Governor Spitzer from New York, the former governor of New York, solicited the prostitute down here in D.C.
He was actually using a prostitute. Like, I'm talking about like just a woman and a man who are
Tomorrow.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
like a woman and a man who are unmarried. Like, would there be any DA that would go after that?
It depends. That's just it. The law says that if you cross state lines with immoral purposes, some people would say, hey, premarital sex, I mean, that's kind of accepted. Other people in different parts of the country would say that's immoral, and if we want to get you, we can.
Oh, that's still good law.
It is still good law, and that's the thing. It really puts you in the hands of the police and law enforcement and district attorney and judge. Because in New York, they might not ever go after this. But in South Carolina, they might. And this is the power of commerce. And if you remember with this, I've given you examples of civil rights. The first example of civil rights was the buses. The buses were the first things that were desegregated because when you buy a seat and then the bus crosses state lines, you've bought a service, which is transportation, you've crossed state lines. That was the first thing that was desegregated, not because of moral reasons, but because they could use the commerce power. So keep that in mind. Yes?
Isn't that, like, with the, I know they had a show about Rosa Parks in the sea.
Actually, Rosa Parks was just on a city bus.
He refused to give her a seat up.
It was just a city bus, so it wouldn't have dealt with her because she never crossed state lines. That was something we'll get into a little bit in the Civil Rights chapter, so hold that thought for now. Do y'all remember the Guns Free School Zone Act?
The act that says that if you bring a gun, like
Tuesday and Thursday hasn't seen this yet.
under the Commerce Act, it says if you bring a gun into a school zone, that you can be prosecuted for federal law.
With federal penalties, yes. What was the logic that the federal government used?
Because guns, if it's bought in another state and transferred.
That's what they said?
Well,
That makes sense, but is that what they said? Go ahead, Bart.
Well,
kids would be afraid in school, and you did a little, you might want to get this.
Yeah,
on
yeah.
camera.
Okay, if kids were scared, if guns were in school, kids would be afraid, you said, right? And what would happen?
So they wouldn't do well in school. They would
And if they wouldn't do as well as school, then what?
drop
They
out,
won't get
commit
good
crime.
jobs.
They wouldn't get as good at jobs. And then what would happen?
They would make less money.
And then what would happen?
They would have lower quality of life.
Regarding the Commerce Power.
Oh, tax. They wouldn't be commerce